At 9:17 a.m., over the Solomon Sea, the future of warfare was proving to be a billion-dollar mistake. Inside the cockpits of a B-17 formation, American crews leaned forward, counting the seconds. They had just released their payloads from 20,000 feet. It takes exactly 40 seconds for a bomb to fall from that altitude. That's 40 seconds of faith in the Norden bomb sight, a machine so secret and so complex that its creators promised it could drop a bomb into a pickle barrel from 5 miles up. But below them, the Japanese captains weren't hiding. They were waiting. As the bombs fell, the Japanese destroyers performed a calm, almost bored turn. 40 seconds later, the ocean erupted in harmless white plumes. Not a single piece of shrapnel touched a Japanese hull. Millions of dollars in fuel, aircraft, and high explosives were being turned into expensive sea salt. The U.S. Army Air Forces had built an entire doctrine on the idea that altitude meant safety and accuracy. But in the Pacific, that doctrine was a lie. The math was simple, yet devastating. A destroyer moving at 30 knots can change its position by half a mile while a bomb is still in the air. High-altitude bombing wasn't warfare. It was scientific disorientation. The U.S. was dropping marbles into a coffee cup being dragged by a sprinting cat. To win, the Americans had to do the one thing the manuals strictly forbade. They had to go down. When Major General George Kenney arrived in the Southwest Pacific, he didn't look like a savior. He was short, blunt, and had the temperament of a shop foreman. He looked at the high-altitude raid reports and did something unthinkable. He threw them in the trash. Kenney understood that air power was irrelevant if it couldn't hit a moving target. He realized that if you want to kill a ship, you have to hit it where it lives, at mast height. But at mast height, standard machine guns were useless. Their .50 caliber rounds would skip off a destroyer's steel hull like gravel off armor. Kenney didn't need noise, he needed shock. He turned his eyes toward the 75mm M4 field gun. This was a brute of a weapon, a 10-foot-long artillery piece designed to crack bunkers and punch through the thickest German panzer tanks. On land, it was bolted into 30 tons of steel. To put it in an airplane, a thin, vibrating aluminum tube was pure madness. The engineers at North American Aviation warned him. They ran the stress calculations, and the results screamed red. They told Kenney that the recoil force would be so violent it would shear rivets, shatter the cockpit glass, and potentially tear the nose clean off the airframe. Kenney's response? Mutilate the plane. We have a war to win. The modification was a masterpiece of illegal engineering. Workers sawed off the elegant glass nose of the B-25 Mitchell, the space where the bombardier once sat with his precision optics. In its place, they welded a blunt snout of reinforced steel. Inside that snout sat the 75mm cannon. To handle the recoil, they installed a massive hydraulic cradle that took up half the crawl space. But there was another problem: the loader. The 75mm was a manual load weapon. There was no room for an autoloader in a medium bomber. So, they added a crew member whose sole, terrifying job was to sit in the dark, cramped nose and hand-load 15-pound artillery shells into a vibrating cannon while the pilot flew at 250 miles per hour, 10 feet above the waves. This was the birth of the B-25G flying tank. It was a plane that defied physics. When the pilot pulled the trigger, the recoil was so powerful that the entire aircraft would momentarily slow down in mid-air. The smell of burning cordite filled the cockpit, and the roar of the blast was so loud it could deafen a crew for days. But Kenney wasn't done. While the flying tank was being built, he perfected another outlier tactic: skip bombing. Instead of dropping bombs from the stratosphere, Kenney's pilots would dive to mast height, flying so low their propellers kicked up sea spray. They would release their bombs at point-blank range, skipping them across the water like flat stones across a pond. If the timing was perfect, the bomb wouldn't hit the deck. It would slam into the side of the ship, below the waterline, and detonate against the hull. On March 2, 1943, during the Battle of the Bismarck Sea, Kenney unleashed his mutilated bombers. The result was a massacre that changed the Pacific War forever. A massive Japanese convoy of 16 ships was headed for New Guinea. The high-altitude bombers missed as usual. Then, the low-level B-25s arrived. It wasn't a dance anymore, it was an execution. The Japanese captains, who were used to watching bombs fall for 40 seconds, suddenly faced planes that were flying at them. They didn't have time to turn. The B-25s raked the decks with machine guns, and then the flying tanks fired. A 75mm shell doesn't just hit a ship. It punches through the bridge. It detonates in the engine room. It turns a destroyer into a floating funeral pyre in seconds. By the end of the battle, nearly the entire convoy had been erased. The B-25 Mitchell, with a tank cannon, was a system error that the Japanese never solved. It proved that engineering perfection is meaningless if it ignores the reality of the environment. The Norden bombsight was a miracle of science, but it was a glitched tool for the moving targets of the Pacific. Kenney's mutilated bombers were the real outliers. They proved that audacity, combined with brute force engineering, could overcome material disadvantage. Today, if you see a B-25 at an air show, look at the nose. You won't see the elegant glass of a precision bomber. You'll see the scars of a machine that was forced to go down into the spray, into the flak, and rewrite the rules of war. The Tiger didn't fail because it wasn't good enough. It failed because it was too good. The B-25 succeeded because it was brutal enough. In the end, the Pacific didn't belong to the mathematicians in the clouds. It belonged to the shop foreman and his flying tank. If the story of the artillery piece with wings changed how you see the Pacific War, hit the like button. Every like tells the algorithm that the gritty truth behind the technology deserves to be heard. Subscribe and turn on notifications. We decode the most incredible military outliers every single week. What would you choose? A precision bomber at 20,000 feet with a 90% miss rate? Or a flying tank 10 feet above the water? Let's debate in the comments below. We read every single one.